Hello everyone, welcome. We are so excited to have our friend Michelle Yoshimura-Smith with us today. And we're just going to have a conversation with her, learn a little bit more about her and her story. So thank you so much, Michelle, for doing this video. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, so just right out of the gate, I wanted to ask you, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Michelle Yoshimura-Smith, and I live here in Des Moines, Iowa. What I do during the day and during the week to fill my time is I do project management type work for a major financial institution. And then outside of work to fill my days, I love plants, I love music, I like to play piano and the oboe and sing. So those are some things that keep me busy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I first came across you through Hope with you worship leading and things like that. So very talented, very incredible. So
Thank you.
And your husband Jed, he's also a worship leader. So it's kind of like a dream team dynamic duo, right?
Yes, we met through worship at Hope.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Good deal. So my next question for you is, ethnically, how do you identify for yourself?
I'm half Japanese. That comes from my father's side. So my father's 100% Japanese. And then my mother is a mix of European countries, but primarily Irish and Scottish.
Okay, cool. And so with that kind of dynamic, was there anything different to your upbringing than maybe other people's?
I think I have a really, sometimes I say it's a boring upbringing, but the more I think about it, the more it's really unique, and I'm so thankful for my upbringing. I was born and raised in a small town just outside of Des Moines, Iowa, and my father came from Hawaii and moved to Iowa as an adult for college and to get his master's and things like that. And so my parents chose to stay in Iowa, so I was really raised in kind of a small town, just as your typical Iowan kid. The difference is my father looked a lot different and I looked a little bit different. And so I kind of say I have your typical small town upbringing in Iowa, but at the same time, I know it wasn't very typical.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So when was the first time in your life that you recognized that you were Asian, or that you had that component in your identity?
One of the reasons why I think I'm very blessed and I'm very lucky for my upbringing is that because my father was Japanese and he was dark complected, he very much stood out. And because of that, he chose from a very young age to instill in us that we're going to look different, and that's okay. And it's a good thing, and it's just be yourself, and if people make fun of you, that's their problem, so just don't worry about them. And so from as young as I can remember, my parents told us that we might look different, and that's a good thing. And so I don't know that there was a specific experience here in Iowa where I realized, oh, I'm Asian, oh, I'm different, because it was just a part of who I was from the start and the way in which my parents spoke to us at home.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
Where I did see race, if I can talk about that, it was interesting. Where I did notice the race thing was because my father chose to live here and be surrounded by mostly Caucasian people. He was used to being the only one and just kind of didn't even notice the comments that people made because, because it's what he lived with and what he chose to do. But anytime we would go to visit his family, everyone there is Japanese, everyone is dark complected, everyone has dark hair, and my mom was the weirdo. And so I remember when we would go to visit family, it would be my mom was the strange one. And when we were there, I know a lot of biracial children kind of face this, where when you hang out with white people, they think you're really a minority. And then when you hang out with whatever your other race is, so for us, it's Japanese. When we hang out with my father's family, it was like we were the minorities because we were the white kids of the family. So I think when I spent time with my father's family is more of when I noticed it, because he has a large extended family. And we were kind of the white kids, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective and that insight, which is unique, I think, to biracial people. And so that's something I think is really important for us to identify and to recognize. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video with you, is because so many of us have such different stories and such different perspectives, even though the world may kind of lump us together. And so I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How have you been able to connect with your Asian heritage?
Yeah, so I'm in this position where myself, my father, my brothers, if we wanted to connect with our Asian heritage here in Iowa, we had to really seek it out and really try. And so that made it a little bit more challenging, but that also kind of showed you how much did you want it, how hard were you willing to work to get it. So, a little bit of family history is that my father is third generation in America. His grandfather moved to Hawaii from Japan to work in the pineapple fields, and then his grandmother was a mail order bride from Japan. So they were all of Japanese descent, but they were in America. Right before my father was born, my grandparents lived and worked on the island of Oahu, not far from Pearl Harbor. And so they experienced all of the tragedy and everything that happened during World War II. And as a result of that, my grandparents, out of survival really, decided they were completely American. Even though they looked Japanese, they were American citizens. They were going to act American. They were going to be American. They stopped speaking Japanese at home. They really kind of hid the culture that they had and disconnected as much as they could from it. Yeah. And as a result, even though my father looks Japanese, he doesn't know a lot about the culture. And so, you know, we do have some kind of family recipes that we'll cook together, or that were sort of passed down with the family. But beyond that, we don't have a lot of traditions or a lot of cultural knowledge outside of that. And so both my brothers and I have found people that we can connect with who are of Japanese descent. One of my brothers spent a few years living in Japan. I've had the luxury of being able to travel there a few times, and I'm trying to go back as soon as COVID's done. We're going, and trying to just learn little bits of the language where I can and understand the culture as much as I can. But that's been a lot of individual time researching, trying to find people who are willing to share with me. There are very few people from Japan who have moved to Iowa, and so finding them and learning from them it can be challenging. But you know, that's what we've had to do, is seek it out from classes or from people that we get a chance to meet around the community.
Yeah. Are there aspects of your heritage that you want to experience more?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I've always been curious about is what would life be like in Japan, and because of the language barrier, I can go to a large city and get around just fine, but if I go outside of Tokyo, it gets really challenging. And so I don't know that, unless I were to learn the language, I don't know that I would really be able to truly embrace that experience. And so that, you know, I think living in a small town or living in the country in Japan would be just incredible to see or to experience. And that's something where I don't know that I would ever be able to experience it, but I could always go visit.
That's awesome. Yeah. Are there customs or traditions or experiences that you've had that bring you the most joy? Yeah,
we have a few customs that we've done in the family. In Japan, around New Year's, they make mochi, or they make this dish together for New Year's celebration. And one year, my family was in Hawaii with our extended family. And so we got to actually make mochi together, which is, for people who don't know, because it's not a super common food around here, it is white rice that's been pounded down until it's like the consistency of Play-Doh almost. And then oftentimes when you roll it up and wrap it up into like a little ball, you might put something inside of it to fill. So either like a dessert or a sweet bean paste or something like that. So several years ago, we were able to be in Hawaii over New Year's. We got to make that. So here, we don't have all the tools and all the ingredients to make that, so we can buy mochi at the store. So we typically eat mochi and soba, or buckwheat noodles, on New Year's. That's a fun tradition. That's cool. That we get to do. And then early in May, they have a girls' day. Mina, I'm gonna have to look up the name now. Mina Himari, maybe? But there is a girls' day, and it's really just a day where you celebrate the women in your life, and you just wish for them prosperity and love. That's awesome. That's beautiful. What is one thing that you wish non-Asians knew about Asians? That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is that there is so much diversity among the Asian community. A lot of people don't realize that. All they see is the dark or yellow complected skin and black hair, and they assume everyone looks the same, everyone talks the same, everyone's the same, but there are over 2,000 Asian languages. And with each one of those comes a different culture, a different set of expectations and values in your family and in your community. And so it's easy to lump in Asians together, but there are so many differences amongst Asians. So so while I still say Asians, I still identify as Asian American, absolutely. There are just so many differences that I think people need to be aware of and need to know.
Yeah.
And I think even further from that, I think this goes for all races and all people, but one of the things that I really value is when we can treat each other as individuals. Yes, you may look different from me because you're a different race or a different gender or a different sexual orientation, but we're still humans and we still need love and support. And so I think that's something that's really important to me when it comes to the conversation of diversity and the conversation of Asian Americans is, yes, we might look different, but what do we have in common? And there's a lot to every person, to their experiences that we should value individually.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, that's one of the biggest things that I've been continuing to learn about is that I feel like when it comes to discussions about ethnic identity, like a lot of people, talk about like blacks, Hispanics, Asians, but especially I feel like for Asians, like underneath that, there's so many subcategories, like you were saying, and each of those things, it's a distinct and different culture, and they have their own customs and ways of thinking. And so I feel like that's something that I've been learning the most for myself as I realize my non-Asianness in my life. And so that's been super eye-opening for me. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess along with that, back in March, the world saw an attack in the Atlanta area, which was absolutely heartbreaking, but at the same time, I feel like it was bringing to the surface and bringing to people's attention just the way that a lot of Asian people had been treated in America in the past year. I believe the number was over 3,800 anti-Asian attacks or deaths. And I didn't even know that the number was that high in the past year. And so I was wondering if you would mind sharing some of the things that you've kind of been processing as you've witnessed on the news, just the anti-Asian attacks or the shooting in Atlanta.
Yeah, there's a lot to process in that for sure. I think so my first reaction to the shooting was that it's absolutely heartbreaking, regardless of anyone's race, anyone's place of work. An idea of being attacked where you're working or in a place that should be safe is horrifying. That's really sad. Outside of that, I would say one of the positive things, and I hate to talk about positivity when it's such a tragedy, but one of the positive things that came from it is that people are recognizing that racism against Asians is real and that it is harmful. For many years, I've been talking to close friends of mine and people around me who say, why don't you hear about racism against Asians? And I was like, oh, it's definitely there. And it's just not mainstream. According to the census and various government head counts of people, if you will, the Asian population is considered statistically, I forget what the term is, but we're not important because there's not as many of us.
Wow.
And because of that, there's a lot less attention on it. Another thing that I've shared with a lot of people is that many of us have heard the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And in not all, but in many Asian cultures, they have a similar saying, but it's the nail that sticks out gets the hammer. Many Asian cultures value handling your problems quietly, not making a big deal of them, not causing a scene, and not drumming up any attention, unwanted attention. And so because of that, there's all kinds of crimes, there's all kinds of racism, there's all kinds of comments and violence and things that happen that just aren't reported. And so I think a lot of people, a lot of white people or people who identify as white, as non-Asian, don't believe that racism against Asians is real because of those things. They also, a lot of times people talk about I referenced the model minority myth, and that's that Asian people don't need help, they're doing just fine because look, they all are doctors, they're all really good at math, they're really smart, they all go to college. What people don't realize is that a lot of that comes from teeny tiny portion of the Asian population, a few of the people who were able to make it to come to the United States and to do really well for themselves. But majority of the Asians that came here as refugees with nothing. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have the services and the resources they needed to succeed. And so they've had to work even harder just to do simple things like get a job, pay the bills, graduate high school. And so I think a lot of people rely on that model minority myth, and they think Asians are doing great. So when there's racist comments against them, it's just lighthearted, it's funny, or it's, oh, the girls are super sexy, or the women are hypersexualized and they're great looking, or whatever, or it's they're so smart, they're so good at math. So people believe that the racist stereotypes that come from that are all positive. And so it's no big deal. It's not harmful if all these stereotypes are positive. And the reality is they're not positive, or a lot of them are not. And even the ones that are positive are actually harmful.
Right.
And so I think that the tragedy that happened last week and the increase in violence over the past year has really brought that conversation to light. More people are willing to listen and are ready to listen now, especially when we reflect back on the last year and the Black Lives Matter movement from last summer. For the last year, I've kind of taken the posture with the Black Lives Matter movement of there's so much that I don't know and I need to learn. And so I think a lot of people have taken on that posture in the past year, and I think that's a really good mindset to have coming into the tragedies that have happened over the last year and last week in the Asian community. Because if you're truly anti-racist against blacks and against others, or any other race, that includes Asian Americans as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it, and I believe it'll speak to a lot of people too. My final question for you is, do you have any kind of message that you would like to say to other Asian people out there?
I think I would have immediately two reactions or immediately two responses. And the first one is, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and to speak out for yourself and for your family, supporting your community and the people around you. That includes asking for help when you need it and standing up when you see something's wrong. And the second thing is, this might seem to oppose the first piece, but it doesn't mean to, but it's just to brush it off when you can. We've had people treat us as an Asian community poorly for a long time, and it's really easy to let it get under your skin and to affect the way that you see yourself as a human. And so I think it's really important that we are able to brush it off and continue to value ourselves as we were made in Christ's image.
Amen. Thank you so much, Michelle, for taking the time to share with me as well as all of the people watching the video. Again, I just really appreciate your words of wisdom, your words of encouragement, as well as your own vulnerability. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, where can they find you?
I think social media, I'm not on all the platforms, which is, I don't know, unfortunate, but also a beautiful time saver for me. So Instagram is probably the best one. I'm on Facebook like many people as well, but Instagram is probably the best, and my handle is Ayame Yoshimura. And so Ayame is spelled Ayame, and then Yoshimura.
All right, and we'll have that linked down below as well. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks, Matt.